The rain had been falling for hours. Thin, persistent, unambitious rain. The kind that never truly drenched but lingered like a condition. It slicked the asphalt in a sheen that caught the red glow of brake lights and scattered it across the street in trembling lines. The city was quiet in that practiced way cities sometimes are. Not peaceful, but waiting. Elias Ward drove with both hands on the wheel, posture straight, eyes forward. The hum of the tires was steady, metronomic. He had learned long ago that control, if exercised consistently enough, could feel like safety. He drove through the empty corridor of Commerce Street, a four-lane artery lined with shuttered stores and yellow signage. Streetlights blinked unevenly, casting him in and out of light, visibility and shadow alternating every few seconds. When the blue lights flared behind him, they arrived without a siren. Just the flash, blue, puncturing the rain-slicked darkness. Elias exhaled once, controlled, and eased the car to the curb. He did not turn off the engine right away. He kept both hands visible on the steering wheel, palms open, fingers spread slightly apart. The gesture was instinctive now, ritualistic. He looked straight ahead, watching the rain crawl down the windshield in slow, intersecting threads. The unmarked car stopped behind him, lights still pulsing. Two figures emerged, both white, both broad in their movements. The passenger adjusted his belt with a little tug before approaching. The driver hung back a moment longer, tapping something into a device before following. Their silhouettes fractured and reformed in the red wash of taillights. Elias could already feel it, the shift from momentary inconvenience to encounter. The air thickened, procedural, a tap on the glass. He lowered the window halfway, rain misting his sleeve. "Evening," the first officer said. His voice had the practiced flatness of authority. "License and registration." Elias handed them over. No trembling. The documents were already resting on the dashboard, prepared before the car had stopped moving. He moved slowly, deliberate, rehearsed movements as though narrating each gesture for an invisible audience. "Any idea why we pulled you over tonight?" The officer asked. Elias looked up. The man's face was pale, gleaming faintly from the rain. He was young but carried the self-importance of routine power. Elias met his eyes, steady. "No, officer." The second officer had circled to the passenger side, flashlight in hand. The beam cut through the car's interior, over the dashboard, the seat, the passenger floor, before resting momentarily on Elias's shoes. Polished black leather, unmarred by the night's dampness. "Those are some clean shoes," the second officer said. "You coming from somewhere important?" Elias did not answer. The silence expanded, fragile. The first officer shifted. "Sir, we clocked you going a little slow back there. You been drinking tonight?" "No." The rain thickened, drumming faintly against the roof. The sound filled the space where dialogue failed. "Step out of the vehicle for me." It wasn't a request. Elias turned off the ignition, the car sighing into silence. He stepped out carefully, one hand on the door frame, the other visible. The wet pavement reflected the police lights, red and blue merging into purple beneath his feet. The officer gestured toward the back of the car. Elias complied. The second officer lingered near the driver's seat, scanning it with his flashlight again, though there was nothing to find. "What's your name, sir?" "Elias Ward." The first officer wrote it down, letters scratching faintly against the rain. "Where you headed tonight?" "Home." "Where's that?" 15th and Alder." The second officer gave a low whistle. "That's a good neighborhood." The words hung between them. Not praise, not observation, but quiet accusation. Elias's breathing remained steady. Inside, his pulse tapped like a second hand. He could smell the wet pavement, the faint scent of exhaust, the cold metal tang of his own restraint. "Mind if I take a quick look in your trunk?" "Yes," Elias said. The word was calm, almost soft, but it landed with a clarity that disturbed the air. The officer blinked. "Sorry?" "I do mind." The silence that followed was longer than expected. Rain filled it, rhythmic, impartial. A drop slid from the brim of the officer's cap, landing near Elias's shoe. "Just doing our job, sir. I'm aware." The flashlight's beam shifted again, finding his face this time. Elias did not flinch. He met the light directly, letting it wash over him. His reflection blinked in the wet glass of the car window beside them, a man framed by light not his own. "Got something to hide?" No. The second officer circled back, muttering something about calling it in. The first nodded, eyes still on Elias. The authority in his voice began to erode under the weight of Elias's stillness. Look, he said finally, quieter. You fit a description, that's all. Elias didn't respond. The officer cleared his throat. Tall male, dark jacket, driving a black sedan. We had a report earlier. Of what? The officer hesitated. Suspicious behavior. A long pause, rain, streetlight flicker. Elias breathed in slowly, then exhaled. His voice, when it came, was low. You ever stop a man because he fits a description that isn't a person but a color? The officer's face tightened. Not guilt, but irritation. Sir, this doesn't have to be difficult. It isn't, Elias said. Not for me. The officer stepped back, unsure whether he was being defied or dismissed. He gestured to his partner, who returned with a faint smirk. Let's run the plates, he said. Maybe it's nothing. Elias stood by the car, water creeping into his cuffs. The air around him humming faintly with tension. He kept his eyes on the reflection in the side mirror. The two officers behind him, conferring in half-whispers. Beyond them, the city lights burned without interest. He thought briefly of the badge in his jacket pocket, pressed against his ribs. He could feel its outline even now, the hard, rectangular weight of it. A small truth waiting beneath the surface, but not yet. He inhaled. Slow and deep, the air damp and metallic. When the officer returned, he handed back the documents, face flat. Everything checks out. You can go. Elias accepted them without a word. He slid back into the driver's seat, closed the door, and waited a moment before starting the car. The window fogged slightly from his breath. Outside, the officers lingered, watching as he pulled away. As he drove, the flicker of the streetlights continued. Light, shadow, light again. The rain softened. The city resumed its hum, untroubled. In the rearview mirror, the unmarked car remained still for a long time before its lights finally dimmed. Elias adjusted his hands on the wheel, posture unchanged. His shoes, polished, deliberate, pressed the accelerator. The tires hissed softly on the wet road. Somewhere behind him, authority wrote its next report, and the night went on pretending nothing had happened. The precinct was colder than the night outside, not in temperature, but in temperament. The air carried a chemical sterility, the faint odor of disinfectant and damp paper. Everything hummed, the overhead fluorescents, the ancient radiators, the constant murmur of machinery performing endless, invisible labor. Elias Ward was led through the glass doors at 10:47 p.m. The time glowed from a digital clock mounted above the reception desk, red digits against white plastic, pulsing like a wound that refused to close. The officers who had brought him in spoke to the desk sergeant with easy familiarity. Laughter, low and private, rippled between them. He was not cuffed, but his presence carried its own containment. The lobby was large, echoing. Walls lined with fading posters about community trust, the partnership between citizens and police. Each one was yellowed at the corners, curling slightly as if recoiling from its own message. Just need to file the stop, one officer said, sliding a clipboard across the counter. Routine, the sergeant nodded without looking up. His pen moved across forms with the detached rhythm of habit. A cup of coffee sat beside him, a ring of brown stain creeping outward onto the desk, the mark of 1,000 nights just like this one. Elias stood still, hands at his sides. His coat dripped slowly onto the tiled floor, a small growing puddle. No one asked if he wanted to sit. The fluorescent lights above him buzzed with faint irregularity. Each flicker sharpened the outlines of everything. The chairs, the bulletin boards, the peeling linoleum. The brightness was merciless, designed to expose, but in doing so it flattened all distinctions. Under its glare, everything looked equally guilty. He waited. Minutes became a gray stretch of time, uncountable. The officers spoke softly in a corner, their laughter breaking at intervals like waves. He caught fragments, attitude, smart guy, figures. None of it addressed him directly. None of it needed to. A printer somewhere down the hall spat out forms with mechanical indifference. Pages slid onto a tray, curling slightly as they cooled. The sound punctuated the silence, a rhythm of bureaucracy. Eventually, the younger officer gestured toward a metal bench along the wall. "Have a seat, sir," Elias did. The bench was cold, its metal slick from cleaning. He folded his hands loosely in his lap. Across the room, a television mounted near the ceiling played a muted news channel. Endless scroll of headlines. A commentator's mouth moving without sound. Images of distant conflicts, stock market graphs, weather warnings. None of it touched the room. The sergeant called out without looking up. "What's the charge?" The older officer shrugged. "Nothing yet. Just documenting a stop. Then why's he here?" The officer hesitated. "Just thought we'd check a few things." The sergeant finally looked up. His eyes were dull from years of not needing to care. "You can check them without bringing him in." The younger one smiled faintly. "Thought it'd be easier this way." The sergeant grunted, signed another line, and returned to his paperwork. The coffee stain spread a little farther, the brown edge feathering outward like a slow infection. Elias watched it. Not the stain itself, but the way no one noticed. In that moment, he understood the place for what it was. Not a space of justice, but of routine. The violence here wasn't in the shouting or the blows. It was in the paperwork, the polite indifference, the small procedural humiliations that accumulated like dust. A female officer passed through carrying a stack of files. She glanced at him, not curiosity, just a brief acknowledgement of anomaly, then disappeared through a side door. The fluorescent light above him flickered again. For an instant, everything dimmed, then flared back brighter than before. "Ward," the younger officer said, calling him forward. He rose. "Silent. Just need to ask a few questions." They led him to a smaller room, square, colorless, with a metal table and 2 chairs. A camera was mounted in the corner, its small red light steady. A microphone dangled from the ceiling like a single disinterested eye. The officer began filling out a form. His pen scratched across the paper. "Full name?" "Elias Ward." "Address?" He gave it. "Occupation?" Elias paused for half a second. The officer looked up, impatient. "Consultant," Elias said finally. The word was true enough. The officer nodded, writing it down. "Any prior arrests?" "No." "Any reason your registration address doesn't match your current residence?" "I moved recently." The officer didn't respond. The scratching resumed. The sound filled the small room like a saw through wood. When he finished, the officer pushed the clipboard across the table. "Sign at the bottom." Elias took the pen. Its plastic was slick with someone else's fingerprints. He signed neatly, each letter deliberate. The officer gathered the pages, stacking them with a precision that bordered on carelessness. One of the forms caught a drop of coffee from his sleeve, a small brown blotch spreading across the top margin. "He didn't notice, all right," he said, standing. "You can wait in the lobby until we clear this up." Elias nodded once. He rose, chair scraping faintly against the floor, and followed him out. The lobby had emptied. A janitor mopped near the entrance. Slow circles of gray water spreading across the tile. The officers had moved on to new conversations. Elias sat again on the metal bench. He stared ahead at the glass doors. The city beyond refracted into streaks of light by the rain outside. The badge pressed lightly against his chest, still hidden in the inner pocket of his coat. Unseen, unneeded, for now. He could feel the faint warmth of it through the fabric. A small center of gravity in a room that otherwise spun with weightless absurdity. At 11:36, the sergeant called out, "Ward, you're good to go." Elias stood. The officers barely looked up. One of them said something about next time, though the words were half swallowed by a yawn. He walked toward the door. As he passed the counter, he glanced once more at the coffee stain. It had dried now, a warped edge around the form. Permanent, irreversible. Outside, the rain had stopped. The air was cool, thin. The streetlights hummed quietly above, flickering at intervals, casting the sidewalk in alternating shadow and glare. Elias buttoned his coat. The puddles on the pavement reflected the station's fluorescent light, fractured into trembling white lines. He began to walk, slow, deliberate steps, shoes striking softly against the wet concrete. Behind him, the building's glass doors reflected his shape for a moment before swallowing it. Inside, the forms would be filed, the stain overlooked, the laughter resumed. The machine continued, humming under the bright, blind light, and somewhere in its depths his name was written, correct spelling. Neat handwriting. proof of his passage through the system that did not see him. The holding cell was a square of dull concrete and silence. The walls bore the residue of time, faint scuffs, old graffiti scrubbed to illegibility, paint layered over fatigue. The air smelled faintly of bleach and something metallic beneath it, a scent that clung to the skin and refused to dissipate. Elias Ward sat on the narrow bench against the wall, his back straight, hands folded loosely in his lap. His coat was gone, taken at intake, folded somewhere under a label and number. But the badge remained inside it, sealed away in a locker a few doors down. He could feel its absence like phantom weight, a missing center of gravity. The clock above the barred window ticked with bureaucratic precision. Each second landed with the same indifference as the last, the rhythm mechanical, unfeeling. Institutional time did not flow. It accumulated. Across from him, two men murmured to each other, indistinct words, half laughter, half complaint. Another sat on the floor near the corner, knees drawn to his chest, eyes fixed on nothing. The guard outside the bars stood with arms crossed, his face neutral to the point of hostility. The fluorescent light overhead hummed a single unbroken note. Elias breathed slowly, counting the inhales, the exhales. It was training, the discipline of stillness. Years of conditioning had taught him that endurance was not the absence of emotion, but the mastery of it. Rage, he knew, was useful only when directed, never when displayed. His shoes, still polished though dulled by the night, rested neatly side by side on the concrete. He stared at them for a long moment, their quiet order against the chaos around him. They were the one part of himself that the place hadn't stripped away. A man across the cell laughed suddenly, a sharp, cracked sound that bounced off the walls. "They always say the same thing," he muttered. "Always wait here, always just procedure." The guard looked over, then back to his screen. Elias said nothing. He let the sounds of the place fill him, the buzz of the light, the cough of a man half asleep, the mechanical breath of ventilation. Each sound was an assertion of control, not his, but theirs. The institution spoke through these noises. It didn't need to raise its voice. He thought of the badge again, the weight of its metal, the engraving of the agency crest, the thin line of blue against black leather. He had carried it for years, never thinking of it as armor. Tonight it was both shield and mirror, a symbol of legitimacy in a system that denied him the same. He imagined the locker where it now sat, the dull echo of the key turning, the way objects, once separated from their owner, became inert. Power, he knew, required proximity. Time thickened. The clock hands crept forward, each minute indistinguishable from the last. At one point, the guard opened the door to pass in a paper cup of water. The door groaned, hinges dry. Elias took the cup, nodded once. The guard's eyes flicked across him. Not suspicion, not curiosity, just acknowledgement of presence. Then the door closed again, sealing the air. He drank slowly, the water flat and cold. One of the other detainees began humming under his breath. A tune without melody, just repetition. It filled the space between ticks of the clock. The guard said nothing. Elias leaned back against the wall. His mind moved inward, methodical. He replayed the stop, the station, the looks, the laughter. None of it surprised him. He had known the mechanics of humiliation for a long time. What struck him now was its efficiency, how easily it replicated itself through ordinary men, through paperwork and routine. There was no villain here. Only process. He closed his eyes. Behind them he saw the blue pulse of the patrol lights again, the way they fractured across the wet pavement. He remembered the officer's face, young, sure of himself, shaped by authority that had never been questioned. Elias thought, if I had shown them the badge then, it would have ended differently. Then, after a pause, and nothing would have changed. The thought settled in him like sediment, heavy, permanent. From somewhere down the hall came the clatter of a door, a barked order, a brief scuffle. Then silence again. The institution digested everything quietly. He looked up at the clock. 17 a.m. Time had become circular. The man in the corner shifted, muttering to himself. The humming stopped. The guard checked his watch. The light buzzed. Elias rested his elbows on his knees, hands clasped loosely. His breathing stayed measured, though the air was thin. He had spent years in rooms colder than this, under harsher interrogation, though never from men this casual. The indifference was harder to bear than the hostility. He thought of his mother years ago, telling him that silence could be both weapon and wound, that the trick was learning which it was and when. He had learned, now he wielded it. The guard's radio crackled. A voice said something indistinct, a name, maybe his. The guard pressed the receiver to his ear, nodded, and looked toward the cell. "Ward," he said. Elias lifted his head. "Court hearing at 9. You'll be moved upstairs in the morning." He nodded once. No surprise, the guard turned away. The fluorescent light trembled briefly, then steadied. Elias lay back against the wall. His reflection, faint, fractured, appeared in the small glass panel near the door. He studied it, the ghostly outline of a man sitting perfectly still in a place designed to break movement. The night pressed on, thick and indifferent. He thought again of the badge, its concealed gleam, its silence. He imagined holding it again, the cool metal warming against his palm. Power deferred, not lost. The clock ticked toward morning, slow as a verdict. When sleep finally came, it was not rest but suspension, like waiting for a door to open that he already knew would lead into another room of the same design. Outside, the city prepared to wake. Inside, the light burned on without pause, its brightness absolute, its purpose unclear, and beneath that unblinking light, Elias Ward sat alone, counting the seconds of a system that would never count him. Morning came as an intrusion, a hard, sterile light cutting through the slats of the courthouse windows. It did not warm the room. It exposed it. The architecture was built for observation, not comfort. Marble floors, glass partitions, the faint echo of footsteps. The place smelled faintly of polish and paper, cleanliness as performance. Elias Ward stood beside his public defender at the defense table. The wood was worn smooth by years of hands gripping it too tightly. The air carried the scent of old varnish and stale coffee. Above, the fluorescent fixtures hummed in tandem, with the distant murmur of court clerks moving through their routines. The judge entered, without ceremony, a man in his 60s, with tired eyes and a mouth set to neutral. His robe swayed as he sat, the fabric absorbing the light. When he spoke, his voice was dry, almost bored. "Case number 4273B, State versus Ward." The prosecutor rose. Her tone was brisk, efficient. She summarized the charge sheet as if reading from a grocery list. Obstructing an officer, failure to comply, possible disorderly conduct. Her words were precise, bureaucratically alive and morally dead. Behind her, the two officers from the night before stood with folded arms. Their uniforms were crisp now, their posture rehearsed. One of them, the younger, kept glancing toward Elias, eyes narrowed not in accusation but in a quiet, defensive disbelief. The older one watched the floor. Elias' public defender was a woman in her 40s, worn down by repetition. Her suit was clean but tired, her briefcase filled with too many other people's stories. She leaned toward him, whispered, "Don't say anything unless I tell you." He nodded. The proceedings began in the usual order: recitation, correction, clarification. The stenographer's keys clicked rhythmically, a precise record of banality. Elias felt each word being entered into the permanent archive of the state's indifference. "Mr. Ward," the judge said finally, glancing at him over the rim of his glasses. "You understand the charges?" "Yes. Do you have anything to add before we proceed?" His attorney's hand brushed his sleeve. Warning, restraint. Elias shook his head once. "No, Your Honor." The courtroom's silence was not peaceful. It was managed, the quiet of authority, not agreement. The prosecutor continued. Officers McLean and Havers conducted a lawful traffic stop. The defendant displayed reluctance to cooperate and refused a vehicle search. His demeanor was, she hesitated, searching for the correct word, provocative. The word settled in the air like dust. Elias's eyes did not move. The glass partition beside him caught his reflection, distorted slightly by the angle. Behind that reflection, he could see the officers' faces doubled, ghostly, overlapping his own. For a moment, the room appeared as it was, a hall of mirrors, everyone watching themselves through the lens of authority. His attorney rose, her voice even but thin. "Your Honor, the stop was without cause. The officers had no probable reason to detain my client. The paperwork provided lacks a clear justification for the search request." The judge nodded absently, eyes on his notes. We'll get to that, she continued anyway. Furthermore, Mr. Ward complied fully with every lawful order. There's no record of obstruction or misconduct, the prosecutor interrupted. Non-compliance doesn't always show up on paper. A few soft laughs rippled from the gallery. Reporters, clerks, others waiting for their cases. The judge didn't reprimand anyone. Elias remained still. His breathing was measured, almost invisible. From the corner of his eye, he noticed the light shift. Sunlight struck the glass panels on the wall, scattering into fragments that danced across the judge's bench. The room shimmered briefly, illusion mistaken for beauty. The judge leaned forward. Mr. Ward, given the circumstances, I'm inclined to dismiss pending verification of your identity and residence. However, I'd like to know why you refused the search. The question hung between them like a test. Elias raised his eyes to meet the judge's. The air seemed to contract. I didn't refuse, he said softly. I declined. The distinction lingered. The courtroom adjusted itself around the sound. Small shifts in posture. The prosecutor's pen freezing mid-note. The judge frowned. Semantics don't change procedure, Mr. Ward. They change intent. The words were calm, stripped of emotion, yet the tension in the room deepened. The prosecutor exhaled sharply, annoyed at the disruption of rhythm. The judge leaned back. Intent isn't on trial. Elias said nothing. The silence after his words stretched long enough to feel deliberate. Outside, a siren wailed somewhere in the city. Faint, fading. Inside, time congealed again. His attorney shifted uneasily. Your Honor, if we could proceed to the identity verification. Yes, the judge said, already signaling to the clerk. Let's see the file. The clerk moved to the evidence table, retrieving a clear plastic bag containing Elias's belongings, wallet, keys, watch. The bag's surface reflected the courtroom light like glass over water. The clerk handed it to the bailiff, who brought it forward. Mr. Ward, the judge said, can you confirm that these are yours? Elias nodded once. They are. The bailiff began to open the bag, removing the items one by one. The sound of crinkling plastic filled the room. Small, sharp, surgical. Then the hand paused. A dark leather wallet, a folded set of credentials. The bailiff glanced at the judge. What's that? The judge asked. The bailiff handed it to him. The room shifted again, attention narrowing to a single object. The leather was worn but well kept. On its front, a faint embossing caught the light. The judge opened it halfway, enough to glimpse a seal, an ID card, a metallic glint beneath protective plastic. His eyebrows rose slightly. This says... He hesitated, eyes darting toward Elias. You're employed by the Central Intelligence Agency? The prosecutor froze. The officers behind her exchanged quick, uneasy glances. Elias didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence that followed was absolute. A silence that seemed to breathe. Even the lights, constant all morning, felt quieter. The judge cleared his throat. Is this valid? Elias's attorney blinked, then nodded faintly. Yes, Your Honor. My client has provided documentation to that effect. The judge adjusted his posture, robe shifting slightly. He looked again at Elias, differently now, as if seeing a man through a lens newly polished. The prosecutor's mouth opened, then closed. The younger officer stepped forward, face paling. Sir, we weren't aware. The judge raised a hand. That will be all. No one spoke again. The glass panels, suddenly luminous with sunlight, reflected everything. The stunned faces, the judge's uncertain dignity, the two officers standing too straight. The illusion of transparency had turned on them. The judge's gavel came down once, a hollow sound that echoed longer than it should have. Case dismissed. Elias did not move immediately. He stood there, watching the weight of ritual collapse under a single, unspoken truth. Then he turned, slow and composed. His attorney gathered the papers with trembling hands. The prosecutor stared down at her notes, pen unmoving. As Elias walked past the officers, neither met his gaze. The marble floor mirrored their boots, the polish blurring their outlines. Outside the courtroom doors, the sunlight was blinding. He paused before stepping through, the echo of the gavel still in his mind, the sound of power trying to reassert itself after being momentarily stripped bare. He adjusted his jacket. The badge, visible now through the thin leather fold, caught a glint of the morning light, and for a fleeting instant, the system that had built itself upon seeing everything finally looked back and saw. The sound that followed the judge's gavel was not silence. It was something denser, a suspension, as if the air itself had stopped deciding how to move. The courtroom, moments ago filled with the usual administrative rhythm, shuffling papers, shifting chairs, the click of keys, now stood perfectly still. Elias Ward remained at the defense table. The judge still held his identification wallet halfway open, his fingers hovering uncertainly over the edges of its leather fold. Light from the high windows struck the metal badge inside, the gold seal reflecting upward. Not bright, not theatrical, but cold and exact. It gleamed like a surgical instrument catching daylight. "Is this authentic?" the prosecutor asked finally, her voice unsteady. It was not disbelief she expressed, but something more fragile, the awareness of how easily her certainty had been misplaced. Elias met her gaze, calm. "It is," the judge inhaled through his nose, eyes darting between Elias and the document. The transformation was almost imperceptible. The way he straightened his back, adjusted his tone, softened the harsh precision that had filled the morning's proceedings. "I see," he said. His voice had lost its dryness. "Mr. Ward, perhaps you should have identified yourself earlier." Elias didn't respond. The words hung between them, a plea disguised as logic. The system's reflex to locate blame anywhere but itself. Behind the prosecutor, the two officers stood as if erased from the scene, their stillness an act of defense. The younger one's face had drained of color. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. The older officer's hands clasped behind his back, trembling just enough for the motion to be visible. The courtroom clerk had stopped typing. The recorder light blinked red, still running, the machine indifferent to the discomfort of those it documented. Elias stepped forward slowly, his movement measured. He reached out and took the badge from the judge's hand. Their fingers did not touch, but the judge's hesitation lingered in the air like static. Elias closed the leather wallet with a quiet snap. The sound was soft, final. "Mr. Ward," the judge began, searching for procedural footing. "You understand the position this places us in. If this is legitimate, and I'm sure it is, the charges are without standing. This appears to be a misunderstanding." Elias looked at him. "That's one word for it. No rise in tone, no irony. Just the simple accuracy of a scalpel." The judge swallowed. His gaze drifted toward the gallery, where a few reporters and observers sat frozen, unsure whether to take notes or to vanish. The prosecutor, cheeks flushed, shuffled her papers as though rearranging them might reassemble the illusion of order. "Your Honor," she said quickly, "we can dismiss without prejudice pending confirmation. I'll file the motion now." "Do that," the judge said. The officers behind her shifted their weight, the sound of boots on marble echoing with disproportionate volume. Elias turned toward them. His expression didn't change, but something in the air did, as though the direction of gravity had reversed. For the first time, they were the ones under observation. The younger officer attempted composure. "Sir, we didn't know." Elias's voice was low, almost kind. "No, you didn't." The officer's mouth closed again. The older one stared at the floor, lips pressed thin. Elias placed the badge on the defense table, the light from the window sliding across its surface like a blade. The room watched it, the seal, the name, the emblem of a truth they could neither challenge nor integrate. "This," Elias said quietly, "doesn't change what happened." The judge flinched slightly, not at the words themselves, but at their calm. "Mr. Ward, it doesn't change the stop, or the search request, or the tone." He paused. "It only changes how you look at me now." No one spoke. The silence became oppressive, filling the chamber like fog. He continued, voice steady. "If the badge hadn't been there, I'd still be sitting in a cell. You'd still be listening to their version of restraint." He nodded toward the officers. "And you'd believe it." The judge shifted in his seat, robe folding awkwardly. "Mr. Ward, this is not the venue for political commentary." "It's not commentary," Elias said. "It's context." The courtroom felt smaller now, ceilings lower, walls closer. The glass partitions that once signified transparency now reflected the trapped faces of everyone inside. Light ricocheted from surface to surface, multiplying their unease. The prosecutor gathered her folders, muttering something about internal review. Her voice had thinned into administrative safety. The ritual of recovery had begun, the system reassembling its mask. Elias picked up the badge again, held it for a moment in his hand. Its edges were cool. The metal bore faint scratches, marks of use of legitimacy earned elsewhere. He regarded it not as salvation, but as artifact, the only language this room respected. The judge cleared his throat. Case dismissed. Mr. Ward, you're free to go. The phrase intended as closure arrived instead as indictment. Elias turned. He walked past the prosecution's table, past the officers, past the clerk frozen mid-keystroke. His footsteps echoed in the chamber, slow, deliberate, each one a quiet accounting. At the door he stopped. He looked back once. The badge in his hand caught the last angle of morning light and cast a faint, wavering reflection on the marble floor, not bright enough to dazzle, but enough to reveal the cracks beneath the polish. That reflection trembled with every breath the room dared take. He placed the badge in his breast pocket, the gesture neat, almost ceremonial. "You can keep the paperwork," he said softly. No one replied. He stepped through the heavy doors into the corridor beyond. The sound of them closing behind him was deep and final, not triumph, but conclusion. Outside, the hallway stretched long and bright, lined with glass panels that mirrored his passage back at him from every angle. The reflections multiplied, man, badge, silence, until they became indistinguishable. For a brief, disorienting moment, it seemed the entire institution was watching itself through his calm, and in that gaze, unblinking, unhurried, it saw exactly what it had built. The courthouse doors opened into the white glare of noon. Light flooded the steps hard and clean, washing over stone and skin alike with the same indifference. Elias Ward stepped into it, blinking once. The air outside was warmer than the sterile chill of the courtroom, but it carried no relief, only exposure. Traffic murmured on the avenue below. A bus released its brakes with a hiss. A cyclist passed, head down, phone clipped to his shoulder. The city moved as it always did, continuous, mechanical, unobservant. No one waiting on the sidewalk knew what had transpired inside the building, and no one cared to. Elias descended the stairs slowly. Each step was deliberate, his shadow lengthening behind him, fractured by the courthouse columns. When he reached the bottom, he paused and turned his face upward, studying the architecture. The facade of justice, built to impress and to distance. The carved scales above the entrance gleamed faintly in the sun. The marble, perfect from a distance, bore fine cracks near the edges, spidering toward the foundation. He adjusted his tie, not out of vanity but habit. His movements retained their precision, though something beneath them had shifted, an invisible fracture between control and exhaustion. Across the street, a news van idled, its crew half asleep inside. The story had already thinned into rumor. CIA agent mistaken for suspect, someone would later type, the headline stripped of weight. There would be no names, no questions about the ease of the mistake. Inside, behind those thick courthouse walls, the machinery resumed. The judge's pen moved across another case file. The prosecutor spoke softly to a new defendant, her voice once again professional, detached. The two officers lingered near the security desk, their conversation low, nervous. "Can you believe?" one began. "Keep your voice down," the other hissed. The courthouse clock ticked on, impartial as ever. Elias crossed the plaza, passing beneath the bronze statue of a blindfolded woman holding scales. Her expression, carved in stone, carried neither mercy nor recognition. The pigeons circling her pedestal had left white stains across her feet. The badge rested in his pocket, its weight distinct, undeniable. He felt it against his chest with every step. Not pride, not shame, but gravity. The metal was still cool from the courtroom's air, its engraved letters pressing faintly through the fabric. At the corner he paused before a crosswalk. The signal blinked red, then white. He moved with the crowd, his body absorbed into the rhythm of strangers. The hum of the city rose around him, the ceaseless, civic murmur that consumed everything. Sirens in the distance, vendors shouting, a child's laughter puncturing through. He walked several blocks before finding his car. The windshield glimmered with a thin coat of dust and light rain residue from the night before. He opened the door, sat, and let the quiet close around him. The hum of the city seeped through the windows like a faint electric pulse. For a long moment, he did not start the engine. His hands rested on the steering wheel, fingers still. He thought of the stop, the command to pull over, the voice that mistook calm for guilt, the streetlights blinking unevenly above, the rain that blurred everything but the intent. He thought of the cell, the clock that refused to hurry, the guard who wouldn't meet his eye. He thought of the badge, how it had changed the air in that courtroom, how silence had transformed into panic, then apology. He started the car. The sound was soft, procedural. He merged into traffic and let the city's rhythm absorb him again, the pattern of motion indistinguishable from submission. It took him 20 minutes to reach home. The building was modest, stone-faced, quiet. Inside, the air was still. He set his keys on the counter, the metallic sound echoing faintly through the narrow space. Then, slowly, he untied his shoes. The laces came undone in 2 even pulls. He slipped the shoes off and placed them neatly by the door. Toes aligned, leather faintly scuffed from the courthouse steps. The gesture felt ceremonial, a small restoration of order after the long machinery of disorder. He stood barefoot on the hardwood floor. The grain beneath his feet was cool, smooth, grounding. From his jacket pocket he drew the badge. For a moment he held it at arm's length, studying it under the noon light filtering through the blinds. The metal caught the light the way it had in the courtroom. Not shining exactly, but reflecting judgment. The seal, the agency crest, the name. Proof of belonging. Proof of exception. He placed it on the table. The sound was faint but carried, a note of finality that lingered in the stillness. There it lay, small, perfect, undeniable. The light turned it gold, then dull, then gold again as the blinds shifted with the breeze. He stared at it until the reflection on the wall began to fade, swallowed by shadow. On the television across the room, the muted news anchor's lips moved silently. New headlines, new crises. The city continued to hum outside, untroubled by what it had done and what it would do again. Elias sat at the table, hands folded. He thought not of vindication, but of sequence, the pattern that had unfolded exactly as designed. His survival had required credentials, not innocence. The system had blinked, not changed. He breathed slowly, the rhythm the same as it had been in the cell. The difference now was only setting. Outside, a siren wailed briefly, then receded into distance. The badge on the table gleamed once more, a flare of light like a heartbeat, before settling into stillness. Elias leaned back, eyes half closed. The clock on the wall ticked forward. Its sound patient, bureaucratic. In the city beyond, another car was stopped, another form filled, another silence recorded. The cycle held. He opened his eyes again, gaze returning to the badge, its presence accused without speaking. It gleamed not as a symbol of authority, but as evidence of what it took to be seen, to be believed, to survive. The hum of the refrigerator joined the clock, the city, the air, the quiet machinery of continuity. Elias rose, turned off the light, and left the badge where it was. In the dimness, it caught the last glint of daylight, faint, flickering, like a truth the world had briefly seen and immediately forgot.